What if the warning sirens start after the explosion? That sounds impossible. But a number quietly appearing in military reports suggests it may already be happening. 4 minutes and 20 seconds. That's how long a new Iranian hypersonic missile would need to travel from central Iran to Israel. And the problem is simple, but terrifying. Israel's civilian alert system needs 6 minutes to complete its warning cycle. Detect the launch, calculate the trajectory, transmit alerts, activate sirens, and give people time to reach shelters. 6 minutes. But the missile arrives in 4 minutes and 20 seconds, which means the explosion could happen 1 minute and 40 seconds before the warning system finishes its job, before people even fully understand what is happening. And the weapon behind this calculation is not theoretical. Iran calls it the Fattah-2, a hypersonic glide vehicle reportedly capable of reaching speeds close to Mach 15, roughly 11,500 miles per hour. At that speed, the nearly 1,000-mile distance between Tehran and Tel Aviv collapses into just over 4 minutes of flight time. When Israeli radar operators first saw those speeds in tracking simulations, some initially assumed the data was wrong. Not because the sensors were malfunctioning, but because the numbers implied a threat profile modern missile defense systems were never designed to handle. And before we break down why this missile is creating such concern inside defense circles, take a moment to support the channel if you find these deep geopolitical analyses valuable. Subscribe and leave a like, because what we're about to examine could reshape how the entire world thinks about missile defense. To understand why the Fattah-2 matters, you first need to understand how missile defense normally works. Traditional long-range missiles follow predictable ballistic paths. After launch, they climb high above the atmosphere, then gravity pulls them back toward Earth along a calculated arc. Radar systems track that path and predict where the missile will be seconds or minutes later. Interceptors are then launched toward that predicted point in space. If the calculations are correct, the interceptor collides with the incoming missile and destroys it. Israel built its layered defense system around this principle. Arrow 3 intercepts high-altitude ballistic missiles. David's Sling engages medium-range threats. Iron Dome handles short-range rockets and drones. Together, they form one of the most sophisticated air defense networks on the planet. But the Fattah-2 does not behave like a traditional ballistic missile. After the booster accelerates it to extreme speed, the glide vehicle separates and begins maneuvering through the upper atmosphere at altitudes below 50 kilometers. Instead of following a fixed arc, it continuously adjusts its direction. Small corrections, a few degrees left, a few degrees right, but enough to disrupt interception calculations. Because missile defense depends on predicting where the target will be, if the target keeps shifting its path while traveling at Mach 15, the predicted intercept point becomes wrong almost instantly. And when a weapon is moving 3 miles every second, even a tiny error means missing by miles. Arrow 3 interceptors are designed to engage higher altitude ballistic threats. David's Sling is optimized for targets moving far slower than Mach 15. Iron Dome was never built to intercept hypersonic weapons at all. So the result is a strange and unsettling situation. Israel's defensive layers are still operational, but none were specifically designed for a maneuvering hypersonic glide vehicle moving this fast. Now imagine the timeline Israeli planners are studying. Second 0. A launcher in Iran fires the missile. Within seconds, satellites detect the heat plume and radar begins tracking the object. The trajectory shows it heading toward Israel. Interceptor batteries move to alert status. In the first minute, everything looks like a normal long-range missile launch. During the second minute, the booster separates and the hypersonic glide vehicle begins its descent phase at Mach 15. Interceptors launch toward the predicted intercept point. But in the third minute, the vehicle starts maneuvering. Slight course changes that throw off interception calculations. Radar updates the trajectory, but by then the missile is less than a minute from impact. New intercept attempts cannot be launched in time. The civilian alert system activates sirens roughly 20 seconds before impact. People hear the warning and start moving toward shelters. But in cities like Tel Aviv, reaching shelter usually takes around 90 seconds. The explosion happens long before that window closes. In that scenario, the siren becomes less a warning and more a notification that something has already happened. And that realization is deeply unsettling for a society that has lived for decades with the assumption that missile defense and early warning systems provide at least some level of protection. Iron Dome intercepts most rockets. Civil defense alerts usually give people time to reach shelter. But a weapon that compresses the entire timeline into 4 minutes changes that equation dramatically. Because if warning arrives almost simultaneously with impact, the entire logic of civil defense begins to break down. Inside Israel's defense establishment, that possibility is raising difficult strategic questions, not just about civilian protection, but about deterrence itself. Israeli military doctrine long assumed early warning would provide time for retaliation, even before incoming missiles hit their targets. If Iran launched missiles, Israeli aircraft could be airborne within minutes, heading toward retaliatory targets. That created deterrence, the knowledge that any attack would trigger immediate consequences. But a 4-minute flight time compresses that decision cycle dramatically. By the time commanders confirm the launch and authorize a response, the missile may already have impacted. Retaliation becomes reactive instead of immediate, and that changes the strategic balance in ways analysts are still trying to fully understand. The short timeline also creates dangerous pressure on decision-making. When radar detects a hypersonic object heading toward Israel, commanders may have only minutes to determine whether the payload is conventional or something far more destructive. Those are decisions that normally require verification and careful analysis, but a 4-minute window forces them to be made almost instantly. And that risk of miscalculation is one reason many analysts believe Iran's hypersonic demonstration is not only a message for Israel, it is a message for every country that relies on missile defense systems. The United States, Europe, and several Asian countries operate similar defensive architectures based on the same assumptions: predictable trajectories, interceptable speeds, and enough warning time for civilians to seek shelter. Hypersonic glide vehicles challenge all three assumptions simultaneously. Russia has already deployed hypersonic weapons. China is developing advanced systems. North Korea is pursuing similar technology. If these capabilities spread, the strategic environment could change quickly. Missile defense would no longer guarantee the response time modern societies depend on, and that could reshape the psychology of deterrence itself. Because once adversaries believe they can strike targets in minutes, with limited chance of interception, the stability created by traditional defense systems begins to erode. Researchers are already exploring new defensive technologies: faster interceptors, directed energy systems, and space-based tracking networks capable of responding more quickly. But most of those systems remain in development. None are widely deployed against maneuvering hypersonic targets moving at Mach 15. Which means the number we started with, 4 minutes and 20 seconds, might represent more than just a technical detail. It could mark the beginning of a new era in warfare, where the speed of attack begins to outrun the speed of defense. And if that shift is real, the consequences may extend far beyond the Middle East. Because once the world realizes that certain weapons can cross vast distances in minutes while maneuvering unpredictably through the atmosphere, the entire architecture of deterrence, warning, and response begins to look very different. So if you want to follow how hypersonic weapons could reshape not just regional conflicts, but the global balance of power in the coming years, subscribe to the channel and leave a like, because what we may be witnessing now could be only the beginning of a much larger strategic transformation. But here's the part that makes this story far more disturbing. The real problem is not only the missile. The real problem is time, or rather, the disappearance of it. For decades, modern military strategy was built on one simple assumption: there is always time between detection and impact. Time to confirm the launch, time to calculate the trajectory, time to activate defenses, and time for leaders to decide how to respond. That time window was the invisible foundation of deterrence. But a hypersonic glide vehicle traveling at Mach 15 almost erases that window completely. Suddenly, those minutes that once meant safety become a race against physics. Israeli planners are now asking questions that, until recently, sounded theoretical. What happens if the next missile does not hit a military facility, but a dense civilian district? What happens if several missiles launch at the same time from different locations? Hypersonic glide vehicles are extremely difficult to track once they begin maneuvering. Radar systems must constantly update trajectories, and even small course changes create uncertainty about where the missile will actually land. In a multi-missile scenario, air defense operators might not even know which cities are the true targets until the final seconds before impact. Imagine Sirens activating across multiple regions simultaneously, while computers attempt to calculate the possible impact points. In that moment, uncertainty itself becomes a weapon. And the consequences go far beyond military strategy. Imagine millions of civilians living with the knowledge that a weapon could appear over the horizon and strike in less time than it takes to drive across a city. Imagine financial markets reacting to that level of unpredictability. Airlines reconsidering routes, investors questioning whether ports, power plants, or energy terminals can even be protected when warning time shrinks to minutes. The ripple effects would move through the global economy almost instantly. There is another dangerous dimension as well: decision pressure. In the past, a long-range missile launch provided 10 to 15 minutes for analysts to determine what kind of payload was incoming, conventional or nuclear. That time allowed verification and careful decisions. But with a 4-minute timeline, commanders might have less than 2 minutes to interpret radar data before impact. 2 minutes to decide whether a nation is facing a limited strike or the beginning of something much larger. That level of pressure dramatically increases the risk of miscalculation. And this is why many strategists believe the hypersonic era could destabilize deterrence itself. Because when decision time collapses, the margin for error becomes dangerously small. And the technology is not limited to one country. Russia already operates hypersonic systems. China continues testing advanced glide vehicles. North Korea is experimenting with maneuvering hypersonic missiles. If this technology spreads, the same 4-minute scenario seen in the Middle East could eventually appear in other regions. In parts of East Asia, the distances between rival powers are even shorter, meaning flight times could shrink to just a few minutes. That would force militaries around the world to rethink doctrines built during the Cold War, doctrines that assumed time existed for detection and response. The core challenge is not just speed, but maneuverability. Traditional ballistic missiles follow predictable arcs that radar systems can track. Hypersonic glide vehicles behave more like aircraft moving at extreme velocity, constantly adjusting their path. That combination makes them extremely difficult to intercept using current defense systems. New technologies are being researched: faster interceptors, directed energy weapons, and space-based tracking networks designed to follow hypersonic targets continuously. But most of these systems remain years away from deployment, which means the world may be entering a period where offensive capability advances faster than defensive capability. History has seen this pattern before. When strategic bombers first appeared, air defenses struggled to keep up. When submarines began launching ballistic missiles from hidden locations, naval strategy had to adapt. Hypersonic weapons may now represent the next stage, one where speed itself becomes the decisive advantage. But beyond technology, there is also a political signal. When a country demonstrates it can strike a target in just 4 minutes, it sends a clear message. Distance no longer guarantees safety, and traditional missile shields may not be enough. That message is heard far beyond the Middle East, in Washington, Moscow, Beijing, and every capital where military planners study the future of deterrence. Which brings us back to the number that started this discussion: 4 minutes and 20 seconds. It may sound like a technical detail, but it reflects a deeper shift between warning and impact, between defense and destruction. The real question is what comes next. So what do you think? Can missile defense keep up with this new generation of weapons? Or are we entering an era where speed dominates the battlefield? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you want to follow how hypersonic technology is reshaping global military power, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. The story is still unfolding, and the next development could come sooner than anyone expects.